My relationship didn't start out violently. I don't think a lot of them do. The first time I knew something wasn't right involved violence toward himself. He would go into these rages where he would pull his own hair and punch himself. On one occasion, he broke a plate over his own head. He would ramble about hardships and get overwhelmed. If I tried to comfort him physically, he would either push me away or wind up grabbing my hands and flinging them toward him, trying to make me physically hit him. I would spend about an hour talking him down, and then he'd be okay again. This happened a few times when I was living at a friend's house. To my recollection, she was not there to witness it. The one I do recall her witnessing, the police were involved. He was intoxicated and attempting to choke himself. I called the police because he was threatening suicide. He tried to take the phone from me, and the operator heard it. He was taken to jail to cool off. The next day, I paid a fine on an outstanding warrant. He'd called me and told me that they were going to take him to jail in Blackfoot, where the original incident occurred, and if I didn't bail him out, he would be stuck there following his release. He promised it wouldn't happen again. He would always be okay for a while, long stretches of time where he seemed to be better and we wouldn't argue and he wasn't drinking heavily. I continued my therapy in PSR. He did not and fought every advice I tried to give him regarding ways to receive mental health assistance. I thought if he could just talk to someone qualified to help him get over this emotional turmoil, he would get better and we could be a normal couple. He gave a variety of excuses. He couldn't afford it. I offered to pay and told him where he could get free or discounted therapy sessions. He tried it before and it didn't help. There were no male counselors and he refused to see a female. The only time he completely agreed was when he went to a joint session with me, and after that, that's all he wanted to do. I refused because my counselor was my safe space and we often talked about him. She also refused to treat him because she had an unfair bias against him. The mistake I made was there was always an if. If he just stops drinking, it'll be fine. If he finds some friends where he has a social circle outside of me, he won't be so lonely and depressed. If he just gets medicated, if he just goes to a counselor and sorts all these childhood issues out, he'll be fine and we can be a happy, normal couple. But that didn't happen. There was a cycle with us. It would begin with him drinking or my leaving to hang out with a friend. I would come home and he'd be drunk. This happened more and more often. I would come home and he had already drunk a Four Loko, which is a beverage with very high alcohol content, and he'd be working on a second. When I tried to scold him, he would either ignore me completely or tell me it's okay because he got one for me too. I would never know what kind of mood he'd get into as the night went on. So to cope with his drinking, I drank too. And when this happened, things would get violent, or he would fall into an alcohol-induced depression, and I would take care of him until he eventually went to sleep. When it was violent, it was mostly verbal. He would fling accusations at me, and I would sit there trying to ignore him as I watched a movie or read a book. Sometimes he would take the book from me and stand there waiting for my retaliation. He would insist I hit him. I think this was a way for him to attempt to relieve some sort of tension, but I would usually roll my eyes and tell him he was being ridiculous, that I didn't want to talk to him when he'd been drinking. When I shut down, which is a defense mechanism when things get too emotional, he took it personally and accused me of not caring for him. I would sit there staring at the wall while he screamed in my face, tried to push me over, blew air into my eyes to annoy me, anything to get me to respond. Usually I waited for him to either tire himself out or get bored. More than once when he was so angry he wanted us to fight, he would grab my wrists, jerking me back and forth and screaming for me to hit him. He would bring my hands down on his head, and no matter how hard I pulled, I couldn't get away, so I would just go limp. He would smack me, again trying to get a rise out of me. Not real hard, but enough to be annoying. Sometimes he broke dishes in his anger, and I responded with eye-rolling and sarcasm, frustrated that he broke things that were given to us as gifts. I would ask him what breaking a glass did for him. Why, for example, I'd say, "Why are you breaking a glass? Does it make you feel better?" He would sometimes respond with more yelling. Sometimes he would lock himself in another room, and I cleaned up the mess, spending the rest of the night waiting for another explosion. Usually we just went to sleep separately and the next morning pretended nothing had happened. Or he would give me a half-hearted and embarrassed apology, and I would tell him I never wanted him to drink again. He promised he wouldn't, and the cycle kept going. His physical violence got worse as time went on. Almost never towards me directly, he would break things. He flipped over our dining room table, which was given to me by my parents. Once he threw our Christmas tree across the room and flung things off the entertainment center. Anything nearby he would tear apart and look at me enraged. Sometimes I left. I would take my dog for a short walk trying to calm down. Sometimes I called people for advice, sometimes I didn't. My PSR worker, understanding that I didn't want to leave my home, advised I lock myself in the bathroom until he calmed down. I did this a few times. The first time he banged at the door and screamed at me, and I told him I was not coming out until he calmed down. He eventually went to sleep and I slept in another room. The second time I did this was after a shower. I hadn't brought my clothes in with me and he decided to turn on the air conditioner, trying to make me so cold and annoyed that I would have to come out just to turn it off. It was at times like this I would sit there listening for the sound of police cars responding to a noise complaint, wishing I brought my phone in the bathroom with me. He'd bang on the door so hard at the hinges, it would shake on the hinges. Sometimes I remembered to bring my phone with me, but most of the time I didn't. I would come out and often find him already passed out. I would fume, angry that he could sleep after doing something like that. I'd lie next to him, frustrated and afraid he would wake up angry again. Excuse me. Waking up to his anger is what scared me the most, because I would wake up having no idea what was going on or why he was in such a bad mood. I'd lie there tired and nervous and annoyed, refusing to respond, both to discourage him and because I didn't know a proper response. He would become more angry and would pull the covers off me or yank my pillows from under my head. He'd tug my hair or lightly slap my face, anything to get a rise out of me. I'd get up and he'd brace himself. He'd put his feet apart, telling me to hit him, sometimes laughing in a way that scared me. If I tried to leave, if he saw me grabbing my shoes, he would usually try to stop me, either by physically restraining me or simply standing in front of the door, and then he'd be an unmoving barrier, his expression blank. These times scared me the most. His emptiness meant it could go either way at any moment. If I managed to leave, I ran. I'd run to the emergency room parking lot or behind a building down the road, where I could hide in case he left as well. Sometimes I called people, sometimes I didn't. In the end, I always went back hoping he had calmed down, hoping my dog was all right if I didn't have the presence of mind to take her with me. Almost always, he was in tears, apologetic, insisting he was so scared I'd left him or that I'd gotten hurt. After hurting me, he was in fear I would get hurt, and the irony didn't go unnoticed by me. After reading about it, I became aware that I was experiencing gaslighting, which is, quote, a form of emotional abuse in which the abuser tries to make you doubt your own recall, experiences, and perceptions. A common example of that is, I didn't do that, you misunderstood me, or you're just being over-emotional, it wasn't that bad. I was emotionally manipulated and convinced I was misremembering the event. Maybe I had started it and just didn't remember it. Maybe I had egged him on during, and he would tell me that I did. And I would eventually come to accept it as a fact. Okay, I must have done something and I'm just not remembering doing it. These instances became more and more frequent. I became more depressed and more anxious and would use alcohol and Ativan to numb myself. I would go to a friend's house and dread going home, always uncertain of what would happen. Or I would be gone and he would call me 15 times, asking what I was doing, who I was with, when I was coming home. He would hide his paranoia and controlling behavior with false concern. He would say he was so worried about me, he had no idea where I was. This particular lie annoyed me more than anything. If I went to someone's house, that was where I stayed. But I would agree to his rules. I had to be home at a certain time. If I went anywhere else, he had to know where and why. I had to answer him when he called. There were times when he threatened my dog in an offhand way. If I came home late, he'd say, maybe I'll just leave the door open and let her run away. This suffocation became my life. My concern was, if I kicked him out, where would he go? He'd burned all his bridges, and I told myself I could not let him live in a homeless shelter or on the street. Again, I was convinced that if I changed my behavior and if he got some counseling, it would be okay. My weight fluctuated, my sleeping schedule became erratic, and my anxiety and depression became overwhelming. After an emergency session with my PSR worker, after months of this going on, I went home and told him he had to leave, just for the night until I decided what we needed to do. I told him to get a motel room or go to his mother's house. After being unable to reach his mother and finding all the motels booked, I agreed to let him stay in the spare bedroom. He was not to bother me, and I was going to pretend he wasn't there. I found I was happier when he wasn't in the room with me, and I felt better that I could read without worrying about him coming out to harass me. It was shortly after this that I insisted he leave for good. Learning to live alone was an adjustment, but fortunately I found I had a larger support system than I'd realized. I was afraid of being alone, but more than often I wasn't. I had friends and family, as well as my PSR worker and counselor, who kept reminding me I was going to be okay. It was a strange feeling, but I adjusted slowly and came to realize how unhappy I had been. I had adjusted to the tension and depression, and I would wake up without anxiety, finally. I could go to the store and not have to rush back because I didn't know what kind of mood he would be in. I could talk to my friends and family on the phone without him popping his head out asking if I was talking about him, or have him following me outside while I smoked a cigarette. I could text people without him trying to take my phone, needing to see who I was talking to. I could write in my own journal without fear that he would read it and later use it against me. I could hang out with friends and not worry about coming home to his violence. Slowly, I refound the things I'd lost interest in, and found I could breathe and laugh and enjoy a beer with my dinner without fear in the back of my mind that doing so would trigger him becoming drunk. My life isn't perfect, but it's multitudes better than it was before. I didn't realize how bad it was until I could breathe again. And slowly I adjusted and found one day that I didn't think about him at all and I didn't miss him. I'd like to think that he was a lesson I needed to learn. And having gone through that particular hell, I came out the other side a better person than I was before.